All right, everyone, it's Alex back with episode 47 of the HYPEWORKS podcast with my co-host
Jake, hello.
Jake. Yeah, cool. And today we've got Cairo Kenan Marsh calling from New York. Hi, Cairo.
Alex, Jake, great to meet you guys. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Good stuff. Yeah, we actually we were talking pre-recording about we talked to loads of different people. Like we talked to different types of marketers, social media people, SEO people, loads of people, and you're actually similar to us. You're an agency owner, and maybe you can talk a little bit about your background just to kind of let the audience know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm originally from New York, like it's where I am right now. I come back and forth to New York a bit for family reasons, but I've been based out in Tokyo largely for the last 16 years. Moved out to Tokyo originally to work for a global agency. Well, that wasn't the reason, but that's what I ended up doing. I went out to Tokyo actually more for personal reasons and a chance to explore and grow, but ended up working for 6 years for a global agency. And 10 years ago, started my own agency called Relative, which really is focused around how do you say relationships, and not relationships in the context of CRM, but relationships in the context of how does marketing better align both the customer and brand's interests so that you create something sustainable. I've been doing that now for 10 years and hopefully it'll continue.
Yeah,
So that's the
so
word.
you moved to Asia I think you're similar to our story. Like people that know the podcast, they'll know that we've been based in Asia a long time. So, Asia is obviously now it's fairly dynamic, and things have changed a lot since then. But can you just tell us what was your kind of impressions and of going to Asia when you did like 10 years ago or whatever?
Well, like, yeah, I first came to Asia in 2005, which is really for a friend's wedding. That's what sparked my interest in Japan. A friend of mine from New York was getting married out in Japan. And one of the things that I really felt, and I think to me this is a more powerful allure. I didn't love Japan or Asia or things like that, but I was fascinated by the differences in terms of the cultural nuances, the energy, the body language. And for me, it just really presented itself as a place where I could learn a lot about myself and about things outside of the bubble that I grew up in, the bubble that is New York, if you will. So, Japan was just, and it still is, because Japan's like an onion. There's always another layer for you to peel. You never quite get to the center, right? But it was really just an eye opener for me about different ways to think, different ways to learn, different ways to interact, and I think a growth opportunity. So I loved it from that perspective. And as I've gotten the opportunity to work around Asia, then you go from Japan to Korea to mainland China. They're all very different cultures and energies. It's, I mean, honestly, it's a blessing to be able to be exposed to new opportunities and new ideas. So I'm just grateful for it.
Yeah, and you're working for the agency, market agency at that time as well, right? So you're both on the one hand having to deal with this on a personal level, but you're also having to work in marketing with Asian marketers. So what was your first impression of marketing in Asia?
Well, the first thing that I learned is that what I learned in New York was not really relevant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's really the interesting part because I had worked in New York by the point I had moved out there, I had worked in New York at agencies for about 15 years, and I pretty well established as was a VP of this or head of that, leading strategy or client projects in different areas. So I was feeling pretty good about what I knew, you know. But what you know in a certain context doesn't always apply. And then what I found is that you have to learn to decide what is it that like, because there's lots of call it hacks, if you will, that you learn in your own culture environment. This is how things are done. This is how I present things. This is how I sell people that don't work outside of that environment. When you take those away, you go, okay, well, what do I really have? This universal. What can I actually build on? And in particular, how do I adjust? Like, can I still grow? Can I still work outside of that? And I love that challenge, and I think to some degree it's probably still a challenge because I am a native New Yorker, so I still have to remind myself when I'm in Japan 16 years later, that I've got to do things differently in order to be successful.
Yeah, was it like a lost in translation? Were you like a lost in translation moment when you arrived, like
Uh,
with all the customs and stuff, or
Um, I think I think there's obviously lost in translation moments. I got some stories, probably none of them are appropriate for this podcast.
Don't know about that.
It happened when I had yeah, and I had no idea what's going on until someone broke it down to me afterwards. I'm like, ah, okay. So there's plenty of those sort of moments that I think you have to be open to, right? Like they always say that when you learn something, you have to be okay with sucking at it, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and kids are naturally bad at everything, and they get better, and they don't have an ego about they don't have an expectation they should be good. Once you're good at something, it's hard to suck at something. And I think that when you take yourself out your comfort zone, when you're working, culturally outside of your comfort zone, you're working from a knowledge base outside of your comfort zone, then you do suck at it, and you've got to be comfortable with that opportunity and that experience to grow. And I think again, to me, that's the best part. But yeah, I had plenty of moments where I'm just, you know, sitting there trying to figure things out. Like one of the first things that I learned in Japan, particularly, is that clients sometimes value content more than they value um, performance, if you will. Like, and I don't think, and obviously, content should matter more, but in New York, and I'm certainly in where you guys are from, like there's a degree of like, well, time to present, and it's like time to be on. And the first meeting I went to, we went there as an agency, and there was like two or three of us, and we were working in partnership, and I say partnership with quotations because it's not really partners, with a large Japanese agency, and they brought like 30 guys, all in dark suits, and they just literally read off the deck, no show, no performance, nothing, and the client loved it. I'm like, what was that? Like they could have just emailed that over, but there's a whole different expectation. And I go up there and I do my little song and dance and try to be funny, and nobody smiled. Like because that's not how it works. Like and not to say that it wasn't content driven from what I was trying to say, but I think the performance to a certain degree can take away from your perceived seriousness and things like that. That it's different in the West.
Yeah, that kind of aligns with me and Jake. Yeah,
Yeah.
our experience as well.
Did, yeah. I mean, there is an element of that. I mean, I used to have a boss at Walmart who was Chinese but had studied in Cambridge. And he was very, he'd worked in the UK for several years, mostly then working for an American conglomerate, massive multinational company like Walmart. Um, some of the people when they were doing the presentations would come in for the, monthly performance report, and it would be the same thing, reading numbers off the deck. But this guy would just be there going, tell me what they mean, tell me what the number means, because sometimes there's almost like a superficialness to say, well, the line went up, everything went up, but there's no mention of, well, what was the causal reason behind that line going up? And is there any lines going down that you may have not mentioned in this presentation?
Yeah. No, for
Yeah.
sure. And it's definitely a balance, right? I don't think that and one of the things that I think about getting outside of your own experience, that there's no right way to do this, right? The Western way isn't right. The Japanese way isn't necessarily right, but there's value and merits to both, right? And I think the key when you step outside of your where you are is to look, well, what can I incorporate from either my past experience that I can bring to Japan, in my case, or what do I pick up and learn from Japan that I can adopt that maybe makes me more credible wherever I go?
Yeah. So just to kind of segue into what you're doing now, you're
Yeah.
straddling both of these cultures and these geographical locations. And I think that we should just look into more. What are you doing? What is the feature of your agency that really makes you stand out from other agencies beyond just that sort of straddling of both
Yeah.
locations and cultures?
I think a couple of things. Like, so as I said, our business is focused on the idea of relationships. And I was having an interesting conversation. I just got back to New York this week. I was in Japan last week. I was having a conversation with some of our Japan team about this. And I think that sometimes people go through this bit of a thing where they're all Japan's different and the West is different, and it's all whatever. And I don't personally think that, right? I personally think that At the end of the day, we're communicating and marketing to human beings. And human beings, be they Japanese, be they American, be they British, be they Chinese, be they whatever, it's all the same. Now, in any way of communication, you have to be contextually relevant to who you're communicating to. And there, obviously, there's a lens for culture on that. But the most important part, I think, is how do you identify ways to connect with a human being? And I think that you do that regardless of where you are. So our focus as a company is ruthlessly on that. So we are headquartered based in Japan. We recently opened up in a small office in Taiwan. We're trying to grow our business also here in the US, but it doesn't change. What we do is really focus on how do you build those sort of bonds of connection between a brand and a consumer by understanding ultimately how you can best serve that audience. And we try to apply that in principle universally. Does that make sense?
Does make sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so can you give some examples of like specific strategies, like Cairo,
Right.
just for like
I,
some understanding?
No, for sure. I'll tell you. I'll tell you the core of my thinking right now, right? And it's this thing that I call the connection journey, right? And one of the things that one of my great frustrations is, as an industry, marketing tends to lie to itself, right? And we lie to ourselves because we create frameworks, we create these different things, and there's nothing wrong with that because those are useful tools. We start to believe that they're true. And to me, the biggest lie is the framework that people use around the customer journey, right? And like, because I think customers are not in the journey. They're trying to survive. They're trying to pay their bills. They're not trying to go from prospect to advocate and what are the hurdles they need to get over. And I think this lens of thinking where we go, okay, great. As the businesses, well, what's the customer journey? There is no customer journey because the burden's not on the customer. The burden's on the brand. And the brand has to go through those hoops to sort of build that connection. And that's what we call the connection journey, where it's really about how does the brand go through the phases they need to go through with their audience in order to connect with that audience where that audience feels differently about them. Customer doesn't have to do anything. It's on us. And the idea of that is sort of moving through phases from how do you become relevant, how do you actually be perceived as attractive, how do you actually create trust, and how do you build a sense of investment where consumers want to invest back into the brand and see you win. And so that sort of lens of that connection journey and that sort of strategic framework of relevance, attractiveness, trust, and investment is sort of what we try to do with all the work that we explore. So if you talk to me about a client in Japan, well, the first thing is, okay, I don't care about your industry, I don't care about whatever. What is fundamentally the things that are going to make you relevant to who you want to be relevant for, and why is it important to be that way? And then you go through that journey. Same thing if I'm talking to a client in Taiwan.
Yeah. So things like on a kind of practical level, it's like things like brand. Are we talking about like brand, or are we talking more about like the products, or is there any particular lens you focus on, or it depends?
I think it's all of it. Like again, our lens is connection. That's the lens that we're focused on, right? I think products are proof points for connection because ultimately connection I think starts with how have you solved the problem for your audience and how have you communicated to your audience that you can solve that problem in a way that resonates with them. Product
Mhm.
is a proof point. Like we do that partly because a brand is what we stand for, this is what we believe in, and
Yeah.
we trust that because we have this innovative thing packed full of AI that does X.
Mhm. And it must be, I mean, like myself and Jake, we worked in China, and in China, the culture is very much distribution first, right? They look to, once they open one store, then they open 1,000, right? Whereas obviously in Japan, historically, it's mostly product focused, right? They focus on the quality, making sure the product is the best it can be. Like it's a very product culture there. And similar, I think Taiwan's probably in between somewhere. So like, how do you reconcile that with people like brands in Japan that focus almost always on the product first, right? They don't really, that's the starting point for them.
I tell you, like, I have a ex-client of mine used to be a CMO over at Unilever, and then he was CMO over at Shiseido. One thing he told me, Japanese guy, right? One thing he told me was, look, Japan needs more brand managers. He told me this. This is 12 years ago. Whenever he told me this, um, he said if you look at Japan, for example, the rigorous focus on product has limited the growth of Japan because they don't have that same balance with brand. And again, this is coming not from me. This is someone
Yeah.
from Japan, studied in Kyoto, et cetera, et cetera. His main point was that there's no way, in his words, that Sony should be behind Apple as it applies to iPhones and goods because Sony had the entire ecosystem. They have
Yeah.
payment catalog, they have the technology catalog.
Yeah.
They didn't have is like, what's the brand experience of
Yeah.
wait, what do we stand for? If you only stand for product, then you miss out on opportunity.
It's funny you mentioned Sony. Like we used to compete. We used to work in the smartphone industry, and we used to compete against Sony. And every time they launch a new product, you're like, wow, like that is such a great product. But we always used to beat them because we were more aggressive on the marketing side. So that's spot on.
Yeah, and in the brand narrative is just really really critical. And again, I got this from my ex client, and I think he's really right about that. So I think Japan's product prowess is fantastic, but I think that there's a greater opportunity for them to continue to grow and to be even more dynamic. And honestly, I'll tell you, I have an opinion right now that I think Japan, considering the global economic and political chaos going on, I think Japan has a great opportunity to be a brand leader for the world, and more so than it has been. But to do that, you do have to embrace sort of brand thinking as well as deliver great products.
Yeah, and I guess is that something that can be taught, or do you think this is something that they need to, I don't know, like buy expertise, like so. For example, you're a company, you're approaching a company, and then they literally don't have the resources inside the company. Like, how would you approach that situation?
Well, two things. It can absolutely be taught. Of course, there's a time constraint to learning, right? Like you learn in 2 or 3 years versus do it today and on day one. But I think it can absolutely be taught, or it could be bought. Or probably it should be both. To be honest, like how do you buy now, but grow that later? I really think about like my experience when I first came to Japan. My background was in analytics. I worked in data and systems capabilities team at American Express for a little bit. And so when I got to Japan, no one did data driven marketing. No one really did database marketing because there were laws in place that sort of prohibited that as it applies to sort of direct mail and traditional. Now, when digital took off in Japan, let's say 2012, all of a sudden people are like scrambling, like, how do we do this? They don't have the experience. But I don't think that's an issue today. Like Japan is really good at that today. So I think that there's a process of, and sorry, let me just explain a little bit clearer. I think I was able to survive and work in Japan because they needed to buy that expertise at a point where they didn't have it. They don't need to buy that expertise today. So I think you do both ultimately. It's
Yeah,
same as it applies to brand.
And in terms of the
yeah, interesting.
execution,
And so you talked to,
sorry, Alex, go on.
yeah, go ahead, Jake.
I was going to say, in terms of the
No, I was just
execution,
gonna say like
sorry, mate, I think there's a delay. You first.
no,
Okay,
go.
okay. You get the nice points this time. I was going to say, in terms of execution, yeah, obviously you're working inside the Japanese market domestically, but are you doing what kind of communication channels are you generally governing? Are they anything from like television, offline, out of home, exercises, or email, digital ads? Do you touch all those touch points in your work?
So in our work, we consider ourselves touch point agnostic. I think it's really about what's going to solve the problem. Like it's not about we want to do digital only or offline only. It's really what solves the problem. The majority of our work in reality does tend to be digital. And I think part of that's because we also hold ourselves as an agency. One of our focuses is around accountability, the ability to measure, the ability to leverage data to find the right insights. It's much easier to do that in a digital environment. If you look at the body of our work, I think besides television, we probably have done a bit of everything, from traditional ads, print ads, to events, to B2B seminars, to um, uh, online digital ad buys, e-commerce, UX, UI, et cetera. It doesn't, we're agnostic in that way, in the sense that we'll do anything, though we haven't really done TV. It's really about what the problem calls for, but our work leans digital.
Okay, so now you, Alex.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say we're touching on agency here, and like it's a good time to kind of segue into the changes we're seeing in the agency landscape. So I think a lot of us when we started working and doing agency work, like pre-ChatGPT, things were fairly clear, right? It was very like very simple, and obviously now it's much less clear because and we've gotten to 20 minutes now without mentioning AI, which is an amazing feat. Yeah, because of AI, right? Like literally everyone is using AI, clients are using AI, agencies are using AI. So where do you sit on this change right now?
Look, I think that there's a whole argument that I would tell clients is around, and these are the words that I used, sort of automation versus authenticity. And I think as a brand, you've got to do both. You don't choose. And I think AI is a great automation tool. Like if you want to generate ads quickly, if you want to generate sort of executions or copy lines quickly, that's great. I think the issue that you find is that that ends up being something that someone else will do, or you get work that looks like other work and not that distinctive. AI today, at least, basically replicates other examples, and it does it to your specs, but it's building off of inherent knowledge versus sort of a unique POV or creativity. I think that as a business, you also have to be authentic in order to really sort of connect and stand out. So I think brands and clients need to figure out where are the areas that we can, just be as efficient as we possible. We need volume, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe that's sometimes in a performance media space, but in other times, where are the moments that really matter, where we need to break through with our audience, that we need to focus on authenticity, and we really want to make sure we have a true, distinct voice. And I think getting that balance right will be the challenge. I think right now there's obviously a rush, like adopt new tools, save more money, and that makes sense because it's new. But getting that balance right between where do you do that and where do you actually focus on authenticity difference will make a lot of sense.
I still
You
think
guys,
there's a
are
hybrid
you familiar with
approach.
yeah, I was gonna say, are you familiar with the 40-40-20 rule?
I
Sounds
know 80
familiar, but
20,
do
but I don't
enlighten
know
me,
40
yeah.
40 20.
No, no. So this goes back to my point about AI and authenticity and automation is that, you know, in old school direct marketing, and I can't remember the guy's name who came up with this rule, but it's like 40-40-20 that says, look, 40% of your value comes from targeting, 40% of your value comes from what you actually offer, and 20% of the value comes from creative. So if you get the offer right and you get the targeting right, that's going to do most of the work. How you say it is less important. And the example I always use is that, look, if I'm selling band-aids at 10% off, if I can find out who's bleeding, that's a better win than how I say it. I don't need to tell you about, like, this is how it's made of. Bleeding, 10% off, thing sells itself, you know? And so that's sort of the direct marketing principle or axiom that people have used. My argument today, going back to AI and automation, is that whether you're using Meta's algorithms or Google's algorithms or using whatever creative optimization for developing communications through an automated function, what you've done is you've sort of taken the offer and you've taken the targeting and you've commoditized that where everybody's doing the 80 the same way, where everyone's doing the targeting and the offer and messaging and taglines the same way. So your differentiation really has to be in that sort of creative space and how you express yourself and how you differentiate. So I think it's a really good, to me, back in the day when the gentleman whose name I can't remember came up with this 40-40-20 rule, it was really about like, look, you need to focus on targeting more, you need to focus on messaging, which I think made a lot more sense. In today's world where that all now becomes automated, I think how you deliver that message and that creativity and that brand experience is almost more outsized because that's where you can make a difference.
Here's my argument.
That
Okay,
makes
sorry,
sense. Yeah.
I got to go in on this, but you know,
Yeah, please.
I'm in the AI and the automation space. Okay, so what my agency used to do is very similar to yours. Okay, I used to help Chinese manufacturers position their products in European and US markets. But I actually changed and I've gone into a purely AI and automation space. And my comment is, I think that people use AI generally in the most low effort way. And henceforth, what comes out of it is low effort, low quality content. But there are ways to design the automated system that actually maximize the effect of the input. And if the input into the machine is like your voice, as an example, you can train the AI to mimic your tone, your voice, and to provide it with knowledge base of your own work that will actually support what you're trying to say, then rather than inhibit it. So I still think that there's a hybrid approach to AI that just generally isn't explored by most people because it's still quite new, and it's down to the design on the orchestration layer of which the AI is deployed. And that's my take. That might be a little bit difficult, but I can give you an example. Most people will type in ChatGPT for blogs. Let's say they want to create a blog. I've created a blog about what, and then ChatGPT does all of the work, okay, which makes it sound kind of dull. But if you have your authentic opinion and you can turn that into a 30-second clip, and then the AI agents in the orchestration of this content will go out there, research content around what you're saying, do the backlinks, build the blog, use content from your own internal website, from your knowledge base, interlink them into the blog article, and then draft that onto your website ready for a human in the loop review. That's a very effective way to create unique content that actually maximizes your own voice rather than relying on the AI to actually have the opinion and do the work. That's
I Yeah, Jake, I don't disagree with you at all. I think there's much better ways that we should be using AI, and I agree with you that I think the problem with AI is that we're using it to, like you said, you call it low effort work, but I think we're ultimately transitioning work that has limited value today, and we're trying to expedite or make that more efficient. What we ought to be doing is finding ways to create more value, full stop, right? And AI as an enabler should allow us to create more value. That's where we want to get to. Don't get me wrong, I 100% agree with that. I think what I argue, as I said, is not whether you do authenticity or automation. I think you have to balance it because there's certain points where people, I think,
totally
compete
great.
and connect with people in a distinct way, and I don't think that's replaceable. I think no matter how much you train a machine to mimic, there's not something I think is irreplaceable about human connection, and I think people seek that authenticity at key points in times. And I think if you can deliver that as well as find ways to optimize, be efficient, create new value through technology, I think you're in a better space versus just trying to do one or the other.
Totally agree with you.
I think we're seeing that in the market though right now. Like everyone's betting on one or the other, right? Like that's where they think the value is. But perhaps the value's in the middle.
Yeah,
Could be. Yeah,
absolutely.
there was a company in London, they went viral. I'm not sure you saw this story, but they put out these ads on the London tube, the London Metro. And it was basically saying like, we're going to replace you. I think, Jake, do you remember the slogan? It basically said, you are going to be replaced. AI is going to replace you. And it went viral. And obviously that generated a lot of interest in that company and potentially a lot of sales. But it was very controversial, right? Like the
Yeah.
messaging was very controversial.
No, 100%. And I think you're absolutely right, Alex. I think it is. What I argue is I think brands need a strategy that says, okay, great. How are we going to use AI? How are we where do we focus on what I call authenticity, and how do you balance that so you're not just doing one or the other? That you really have a clear approach for that. And I think naturally, as anything being new, and we're in AI is new for most organizations and enterprises, they try to integrate that into marketing. You might not have that distinction because you're trying things, and that's a part of the process, right? Try things, see what works, and iterate. But I think having that sort of viewpoint in your mind that you need to think about both is important.
Yeah. We just circling back on the agency thing. So we talked about agencies. Big agencies are struggling right now. They're all merging, they're laying off lots of people. Um, for a smaller agency like you and other agencies, like what's the future like? Is it are you looking to like sell to one of these bigger agencies, or do you just want to stay independent, or like what's the agency business like looking like in 2025 and moving forward?
Like for me, honestly, I think, and I don't want to say this the wrong way, but I think the agency industry is not good. I was going to say crap or sucks or something a little bit more aggressive, but generally not good. And I think it's not good because we've done that to ourselves, right? We, as an industry, one, and this is something that really it's one of my whatever points that I always harp on is that agencies aren't really agents. And, every other agent, whether it's a real estate agent or a talent agent, is a connector, right? And I think that what clients want is that connection. They're like, hey, can you help me get customers? That's what they want. I don't really want to.
Yeah.
I don't need a website. I want the customers. And if the
Yeah. I want sales.
customers, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I think agencies as a whole focus more on what we're outputting versus whether or not we're making that connection and that delivery. And I think so we've done it to ourselves a little bit as an industry, and we've also allowed ourselves to not, be assertive or confident as we engage with clients about what our proposition should be. So for me, like what I really hope relative my company can do is help change that, right? To help really focus on being a connector, being an agent, to help really focus on um, offering some degree of inspiration or relevance to the industry and say, well, maybe there's different ways that we can do this. Maybe we shouldn't think about the customer journey. Maybe we should think about the connection journey. How do we help drive the industry forward? So for me, I think we have to be independent
Yeah.
do
Do you
that.
think that the big agencies understand this? Like, do you think they get it, or do you think everyone's kind of still?
I this is just me. I don't think you can like look, I think big agencies are full of smart people. I've worked for Omnicom. I've worked for what's the why am I blanking on this one? Not WPP, but the other one.
Publicists?
Not Publicis, the other one.
Uh, Dentsu?
No, the other one. It's not McCann's holding company. I can't remember right now.
Intercom? Is it Intercom? No, Interpublic? Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you,
Yeah,
Interpublic.
yeah,
Interpublic. Sorry. Yeah. But and so I would say there's a lot of smart people who work at all those agencies. So I'm not going to say that they don't get it. I know they get it. I think the incentive model is wrong. The incentive model around shareholder value doesn't allow you to really focus on that. So at the end of the day, what we're motivated by is our incentives, not necessarily our knowledge. And so if you work at Omnicom, if you work at WPP, if you work at Interpublic, the issue is that the incentive model is really around maximizing quarterly returns to your shareholders, not figuring out how you're actually creating better connection and value for your clients. I don't mean that as any disrespect to them. I know people in there care about the work they do for their clients, but it's hard when you're fighting upstream a little bit. I think
yeah. So in a way, you're saying these guys got too big, and being public companies kind of harmed them,
I,
right?
it's too big, but it's the incentive structure. Like I don't think size is a barrier to having the right incentives. I don't think it is. I think that the way that it's been designed, and I'll use Omnicom as an example. Look, Omnicom was established really through a merger of a couple of agencies, but it was controlled by finance people, and so the incentive structures are inherently finance driven versus agency driven. That's the way
Yeah,
they started.
makes sense. Yeah, that's totally. Yeah, and I was just gonna say, like, if you're a client, like, put yourself in a client's shoes. Like, we've all seen pitches from big agencies and small agencies. Should clients take a chance on small agencies, like in this kind of era now with like AI? If you can automate and be more efficient, should they maybe look at small agencies and give them a chance? Or
I think clients should look at the best possible partner. Like, and I'll be honest, like, I'm I'm a bit of a contrarian by nature, so I don't really buy that just because an agency is independent that means anything. I don't think independence is the angle. I think the value is that as whether you're independent or if you're part of a holding company, what is it that you're really focused on? What's your incentives and what's your motivation? As a client, I don't think it should matter whether it's a big agency, small agency. It's like, what are these guys motivated to do? Are they going to come in and fight for me? Do they believe what I believe? I think that is the only thing that matters. And I think obviously having the track record and the ability in which to do it and the price that you can afford, that's all that matters.
you mentioned track record there. Is that the most important thing for an agency? Like in terms of like selling themselves, like their portfolio, their client list, their track record.
I think I think
Still,
you need, I think you need proof points, yeah. at the end of the day, like you can tell me the smartest thing, but if that smartest thing's never worked for anybody, then I don't know if I can really find it credible. So I think those proof points absolutely do matter.
Yeah, makes sense. Jake, is it time for the question?
Okay. Really? What do I? I see why that gives people pause. I wonder how much they're pausing to think about it or just filtering out what's appropriate to say or not appropriate.
The second one. The second one.
Yeah, I think it might be more the second one. Look, I think we're in a really interesting space, and again, I relate it to the global political situation, which is a bit chaotic, a bit disturbing in certain ways. I think that creates economic uncertainty. I think we live at a time where innovation is going to be key, right? And I think that over the next couple of years, I think the way that we do business, who sort of leads that charge, I think it will change. I think in a good way, the situation is somewhat volatile. So my prediction would be, look, in 2 to 3 years, I don't think things will look like they look now. And I don't know exactly what that'll look like, but I suspect, the companies you're used to looking up to may not be the same, or the models of working may not be the same. Because I think there is a need for a shift in order to adjust to the multiple variables that we as a society are facing.
That's a good answer, yeah. Yeah, and we're based out in Asia as well. So like whenever you're in like Thailand or China, or if we're in Japan, we can catch up and
Yeah.
see what things are like
Are
in
you
6 months, 12 months.
mainly more mainland China or like whereabouts?
Used to be mainland China, but now, yeah, now Thailand and Hong Kong, wherever.
Gotcha. Yeah, I get to
Yeah.
Hong Kong periodically, so maybe that's a good opportunity.
I'm a Hong Kong guy. Everyone knows I'm a Hong Kong guy. So
Okay, nice.
yeah, I can catch you in Hong Kong. Cool.
Nah, seriously, thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, keep in touch.
All right, take care.
See you. See you. Bye bye.